It was 7:02 a.m. when the knock came sharp, deliberate, and far too confident for a stranger. I opened the door and froze. A woman in a tailored cream suit stood on my porch, her diamond ring catching the Oregon sunlight like a weapon. Flanking her were four others, every one of them dressed as if they just stepped out of a luxury magazine. "Mr. Dawson, your property is an eyesore," she announced, shoving a pink slip into my chest. Her voice dripped with authority. "It violates Evergreen Bluff's aesthetic standards. You have 30 days to comply or we'll take legal action." I glanced at the paper, confused. Evergreen Bluff. My family had owned this cabin decades before any development existed. "You've got the wrong guy," I said, but she waved a manicured hand like swatting a fly. What she didn't know, I legally owned the lake they fished in, and the only parking lot their HOA bragged about in glossy brochures. Their empire rested on my land, and now they just declared war. The day had started with the kind of peace you can feel in your bones. The crisp air rolling off the lake, the smell of cedar, the distant call of a loon echoing across still water. I'd been gone for nearly 4 years, working as a wildlife biologist across the Amazon basin. Now standing on the porch of the old Dawson cabin, I thought I'd finally found my sanctuary. This land wasn't just property, it was legacy. My grandfather built this cabin in the late 60s with his own hands, and when he passed away 3 years ago, he left it to me along with a weathered chest filled with journals and hand-drawn maps. It was here I planned to finish my book, a detailed account of endangered species migration, and maybe remember what silence felt like. I'd spent that morning unpacking my field gear, carefully setting up observation equipment near the waterline. To my astonishment, a flash of metallic feathers caught my eye, a pair of cascade firewings, a bird so rare most believed it extinct. Their wings shimmered with bronze and copper hues under the sun. My pulse raced. This was the kind of find biologists dream about, the kind that rewrites chapters in conservation history. And then came the sound, the low growl of engines climbing the gravel road. I turned, expecting maybe a delivery truck. Instead, a convoy of luxury SUVs rolled into view, tires crunching against earth like they owned it. Doors opened in practiced unison, and 5 women emerged, led by the same one who'd just shoved a violation notice into my chest. Her name, I would soon learn, was Victoria Pierce, a woman whose posture screamed power and whose eyes scanned the world like it was hers to categorize. Trailing her was a man who looked like a caricature of wealth, deep tan teeth so white they almost glowed, and a phone held high as he narrated their every move. "Here we are, folks," he said to his unseen audience, panning toward my cabin. The eyesore, dragging down property values at Evergreen Bluff. His tone was theatrical, dripping with mockery. My jaw clenched. They strolled up my dirt path in heels and designer loafers, peering at my gear like it was debris. "This is formal notice," Victoria said again, her manicured fingers pointing to the neon paper she'd thrust into my hand. "Your dwelling violates multiple HOA standards, structural aesthetics, unauthorized shoreline structures," and she gave a pointed glance at my weathered dock, unapproved watercraft storage. I almost laughed. "You're joking," I said. "This property isn't part of any HOA. My family's been here since before Evergreen Bluff even existed." A flicker of annoyance passed across her face, then vanished behind a cool smile. "That's where you're mistaken. Boundaries were redrawn 5 years ago. You're in our jurisdiction now. We have maps to prove it." She motioned to the man, her husband, as I'd later learn, who pulled out a laminated survey like a magician revealing his trick. "You've got 30 days to comply," Victoria continued, "or demolition proceedings begin. Your grandfather may have been eccentric, but times have changed. Evergreen Bluff is a luxury community now. We have a vision." Her voice sharpened, slicing through the morning calm like glass. "You don't fit it." Behind her, the entourage muttered insults loud enough for me to hear: primitive, unsightly, trashy. Each word felt like a stone hurled at the only home that ever truly belonged to me. They turned to leave Victoria, pausing for a final jab. "Oh, and those binoculars and cameras," she gestured toward my equipment. "Wildlife surveillance requires board approval. You'll need to remove them immediately." I stood rooted on the porch long after they vanished, pink slip crumpled in my fist blood, pounding in my ears. I'd returned seeking stillness. Instead, I'd walked straight into a war I hadn't asked for. That night, under the soft hum of lantern light, I dug through my grandfather's chest. Beneath stacks of brittle journals detailing bird migrations and weather patterns, I found something unexpected, a yellowed envelope marked in his bold handwriting. When the firewings return, open the vault. The words prickled against my skin. Vault, I tore through every inch of the cabin, lifting floorboards, tapping walls, scouring the stone hearth for anomalies. Hours passed, my hands, raw clothes, streaked with dust until finally at nearly 3 a.m., my fingers found an irregular seam in the fireplace masonry. A twist, a click, and there it was, a hidden compartment housing an old combination safe. The code was easy, my birthday. Inside, time collapsed into a rush of revelations, property deeds meticulously preserved, topographical maps inked with boundaries, and legal documents bearing my grandfather's signature, proof that while he'd sold parcels decades ago, he'd retained ownership of two critical assets, the lake itself and the track now paved over as Evergreen Bluff's main parking lot. But that wasn't all. Tucked between legal pages were detailed field journals chronicling the Cascade firewings, photographs, nesting diagrams, and most damning for the HOA notarized filings confirming their status as a federally protected species. My grandfather hadn't been eccentric. He'd been deliberate, strategic. He'd known this day might come. And now, staring at the evidence under the dim glow of the lantern, I understood this fight wasn't just about preserving an old cabin. It was about honoring a legacy and protecting something the world had nearly lost. By sunrise, exhaustion hung on me like a second skin, but adrenaline kept me upright. I sat on the porch staring at the lake, coffee gone cold in my hands, the safe's contents spread across the table inside like contraband. The sun was barely cresting the Pine Ridge when a knock jolted me from my fog. Not the hostile rap from yesterday, but a polite, measured tap. Opening the door, I found a woman with dark curls escaping a messy bun, a reusable coffee cup in one hand, and an expression that mixed curiosity with something like defiance. "Hi," she said, offering a firm handshake. "I'm Maria Lopez. Just moved into the glass monstrosity across the cove." I blinked, still half in last night's revelations. Welcome to the neighborhood," she smirked. "If you can call it that. Look, I saw Victoria's little parade yesterday. Thought you might need a friendly face. I'm an environmental attorney." The words landed like a lifeline. Over steaming mugs on the porch, Aria told me her story. She'd bought into Evergreen Bluff, chasing the marketing dream of untouched wilderness, only to be slapped with fines for planting native wildflowers instead of HOA-approved turf grass. $6,000 down the drain, she said, rolling her eyes. And they made me replace it with Kentucky bluegrass in Oregon. Do you know how much water that wastes? When her gaze drifted to my observation gear, her interest sharpened. "You're not just some reclusive guy with a beard, are you?" "I study endangered species," I admitted. "And I found something yesterday. Something big." When I showed her the journals and deeds, the humor drained from her face, replaced by laser focus. "Ethan," she said, using my name like an anchor. "If these firewings are nesting here, that changes everything. And this," she tapped the deed, asserting my ownership of the lake and parking lot, "this is your nuclear option." Before I could respond, the low rumble of engines sliced through the morning calm. We turned toward the shoreline. A convoy of trucks rolled in, hauling excavation equipment. Men in neon vests hopped out, unspooling orange safety fencing like a territorial claim. At their head, Victoria, immaculate as ever, flanked by her husband, still live streaming to his followers. "What the hell?" I muttered, grabbing binoculars. Through the lenses, I watched workers pounding stakes into the soil, perilously close to the firewing nesting area. Victoria gestured broadly, blueprints flapping in the breeze, her voice sharp even from a distance. "They're building already," Arya said, snatching her phone. "And if they bulldoze that shoreline, those nests won't survive." We marched down the path, anger pounding in my veins. Victoria spotted us and straightened her smile, tight as piano wire. "Mr. Dawson," she purred, her tone a venom-laced mockery of politeness. "This is a private improvement project. Board approved. This isn't your land," I shot back, holding her gaze. "You're trespassing." A flicker of doubt crossed her features, gone in a heartbeat. "Our records say otherwise." She turned to the crew. "Keep working." Her husband swung his camera toward me. "This is gold," he crowed. "Local hermit goes feral to stop community progress." Arya stepped forward, her voice calm but edged with steel. "May we see the state permits for this shoreline modification?" Victoria's smile faltered. All permissions are in order, Great Aria said sweetly. Then you won't mind if we verify with the Department of Environmental Quality. She handed over her card with a flourish. Environmental attorney, call me if you need clarification. Victoria pinched the card like it was toxic. This matter doesn't concern you. Oh, it concerns me, Arya said evenly. And the federal government will be very interested in the destruction of a protected species habitat. For the first time, Victoria's mask cracked. Just a hairline fracture, but I saw it. She spun on her heel, barking orders to her crew, while her husband narrated the whole scene for his followers, painting us as villains. Back at the cabin, adrenaline curdled into something heavier, fear mixed with fury. The violation notice on my door had been joined by another citing unauthorized scientific activity, as if studying birds was a crime. That night things escalated. My internet died, service disconnected due to vacancy, according to the provider. Then came the gate, a hulking iron barrier installed across the only access road, manned by an apologetic guard. New HOA directive, he said. Residents only. I live here, I snapped. He frowned. They told us this property's condemned, scheduled for demolition. By the time I slogged back to the cabin on foot, fury had crystallized into resolve. They wanted me isolated, fine, but they'd underestimated what I had and who I'd just found in Arya. Under lantern glow, we pored over maps and legal codes, drafting a plan. Step 1, authenticate the deeds. Step 2, file for emergency habitat protection under the Endangered Species Act. Step 3, expose Victoria's motives because Arya was right. No one fights this hard for aesthetic standards unless millions are at stake. As midnight bled into dawn, I glanced out at the lake. A male firewing perched on the dock rail, feathers catching the moonlight like molten copper. Against all odds, it was still here, trusting this place, trusting me. And in that moment, I made a silent vow. Whatever it takes, I will not let them destroy this. The next morning, Arya and I drove into town, the safe's contents locked in a steel briefcase under my arm. The county records office sat inside a squat brick building that smelled faintly of mildew and bureaucracy. Inside, a clerk confirmed what the yellow documents had already told me. The lake, the shoreline, and the parking lot, the very heart of Evergreen Bluff, were legally mine. Hearing it out loud sparked something in me. For the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't just reacting. I had leverage. But the fight was bigger than property lines. Victoria wasn't just power-hungry, she was strategic. Arya's research revealed a development proposal buried in county filings, a luxury resort project labeled the Osprey Initiative. Renderings showed cocktail bars jutting over water-manicured beaches, replacing natural shorelines, and a sprawling hotel footprint that included one familiar feature, my cabin marked with a bold red X. She's not trying to enforce standards, Arya said grimly. She's trying to erase you. That night, as storm clouds stacked over the mountains, I found myself driving a winding road to the outskirts of town. Arya had tracked down a name scrawled in one of my grandfather's journals. Judge Walter Reed, retired now, but once the sharpest legal mind in 3 counties. His house sat at the edge of a meadow bird feeders, swaying from the eaves wildflowers, crowding every inch of soil. The man who answered the door looked every bit his 70-plus years, but his handshake had iron in it, and his eyes were clear as riverstone. You're James Dawson's grandson, he said, ushering me in without hesitation. He told me this day might come. Those words rooted me to the hardwood floor. You knew about all of this? Walter chuckled, settling into an armchair that seemed to have molded to his frame over decades. Your grandfather played a long game. Back in the 80s, developers came sniffing around Osprey Lake. He sold parcels, yes, but he kept the crown jewels. The lake, the land that makes it valuable. And he locked it all behind ironclad deeds. He poured 2 glasses of whiskey, the good kind that burns clean and leaves warmth blooming in its wake. Made them think they'd won while he was setting the board for checkmate. I told him about Victoria, the threats, the firewings. His face hardened like granite. James found those birds in '73. Kept it quiet so no fool with a camera and a conscience could ruin them. He trusted you'd do the same until someone forced your hand. Walter excused himself, returning with a leather briefcase older than me. Inside, more maps, more legal filings, and a document that stopped my breath cold. Usage agreement, Walter explained, tapping the header. When the first developers went belly up, James let them use your land parking lot and access road for 30 years. No transfer of ownership, no loopholes, just a ticking clock. He slid the paper toward me, his expression grave. Clock runs out in 90 days. Pieces clicked into place like tumblers in a lock. Victoria wasn't just zealous, and she was desperate. The HOA's entire empire rested on land they didn't own, and the countdown had begun. "Why not tell me sooner?" I asked, voice rough. Walter studied his glass. "Because some knowledge only matters when you're ready to act." James believed that. When I left his house that night, briefcase heavier with history than any burden I'd carried before the storm finally broke. Rain lashed the windshield as I drove back to the cabin, wipers clawing at the dark. Arya was waiting on the porch, her phone glowing in the gloom. "You need to see this," she said, thrusting the screen toward me. Maxwell's face filled the frame, all smug confidence and influencer gloss. Behind him, my cabin loomed in the background, lit by a harsh floodlight. "Meet the man standing in the way of progress," he sneered to his thousands of followers. Clips spliced together showed me mid-sentence eyes, wild gestures, exaggerated, stripped of context to paint me as unhinged. The caption read, "Local recluse threatens community's future." Comments poured in beneath a digital mob sharpening pitchforks. "Tear that shack down. He should be grateful they're upgrading his dump." My stomach clenched, not from the insults, but from the strategy. Discredit, isolate, destroy. Victoria wasn't just fighting on land. She was waging war in perception. Ethan Arias said softly, "This isn't about compliance. It's about control. And they're terrified because you hold the one thing they can't buy." Lightning forked across the lake, illuminating the silhouette of the clubhouse gleaming on the opposite shore, a temple of wealth perched on the stolen ground. For the first time, I saw the battlefield clearly. This wasn't a skirmish over paint colors or docks. It was a siege. And starting now, I wasn't just defending a cabin. I was taking the fight to them. By the time dawn rolled over the mountains, my resolve had hardened into something unbreakable. Arya and I spent the next 48 hours moving like generals plotting a siege. We authenticated every deed at the county recorder's office, filed emergency paperwork under the Endangered Species Act, and backed it all with photographic evidence of the firewing nests, time-stamped, geotagged, and notarized. Step 1 complete. Step 2 came from an unexpected ally. Walter, true to his word, worked his old network like a maestro, calling in favors from retired colleagues and county officials. When he walked into my cabin that afternoon, rain dripping from his wax jacket, he was grinning like a man who'd just drawn blood without lifting a sword. "Temporary stop work order," he said, slapping a folder on the table. "Effective immediately. Those bulldozers can't move another inch without risking criminal charges." Relief surged through me, sweet and sharp, but it was short-lived. Because while the law bought us time, perception was still Victoria's weapon. Her husband's curated smear campaign was spreading like oil slick across social feeds, framing me as the villain blocking progress. HOA residents shared the videos, their comments echoing with venom. "Kick him out. Level that shack." "They're controlling the narrative," Arya said grimly, scrolling through her phone. "We need to flip it fast." Walter's eyes gleamed. "You'll have your chance tomorrow night." The HOA meeting, he nodded. Public forum. Residents, investors, board members all in one room. Time to detonate the truth. The Evergreen Bluff Clubhouse looked like a plantation house airlifted from Georgia and dropped into Oregon wilderness. White columns, manicured hedges, valet parking lined with German engineering on wheels. Walking through those doors felt like stepping onto enemy soil. Inside, the air was thick with perfume and expectation. 50, maybe 60 residents sat in neat rows facing a podium where Victoria reigned like a queen in exile. Perfect hair, practiced smile, eyes sharp enough to slice through steel. At her side, Maxwell orchestrated his camera like a conductor panning across the crowd for his live stream. I kept to the back area at my flank, Walter, a solid presence behind us. We waited while Victoria clicked through slides of her Lake Beautification Initiative voice, honeyed as she spun visions of floating docks, curated beaches, and enhanced community experiences. The crowd murmured approval. Investors in the front row nodded like bobbleheads. Then came the dagger. My photo, snapped without consent, flashed on the screen under the caption, "Unauthorized occupant obstructing progress." Mr. Dawson has made unreasonable claims of property ownership. Victoria cooed, her tone dripping with faux concern, and is harboring unregistered wildlife on his lot. She pressed a manicured hand to her chest. "We take resident safety seriously, which is why the board is pursuing appropriate legal remedies." My fist tightened until bone ground against bone, but Aria's whisper anchored me. "Not yet." When the floor opened for Q&A, she rose with quiet authority. "Aria Lopez, new resident on Alder Ridge," she announced. Two questions. Why does HOA marketing promise untouched wilderness while planning to bulldoze it into a beach club? And second, has the board informed residents that the lake you're all so eager to beautify isn't HOA property? Gasps rippled through the room like wind through dry leaves. Victoria's composure cracked just for a beat, but she recovered with surgical precision. "Property boundaries are not up for debate in this forum. The lake and all amenities are part of Evergreen Bluff." "Wrong," Aria said calmly. She held up a folder thick with legal weight. "We've reviewed the original deeds. The lake and the parcel you're using as a parking lot were never sold. They remain the private property of the Dawson family." All hell broke loose. Voices rose in a cacophony of shock and outrage. Someone shouted, "You mean we've been trespassing?" Another, "Can he really cut off lake access?" Victoria's mask shattered into fury. "This is preposterous," she snapped at, pounding the podium. "Our surveys won't matter in court," Walter interrupted, striding forward like a judge reclaiming his bench. His voice carried the weight of decades on the bench. "I can confirm Ms. Lopez's statement. James Dawson retained ownership through a conservation easement. The 30-year use agreement expires in 89 days. At which point," he turned, pinning Victoria with a look that could carve marble, "Mr. Dawson may revoke access at his sole discretion." Chaos erupted. Residents surged to their feet, questions flying like arrows. What does this mean for the clubhouse? The docks? Our property values? Maxwell, ever the opportunist, kept filming, though. For once, panic flickered behind his influencer grin. And then came the kill shot. Dorothy Kane, HOA secretary for a decade, and Victoria's shadow for nearly as long, rose from the second row, clutching a leather-bound ledger to her chest. Her voice trembled, but her words detonated like TNT. "I've seen the plans," she said, eyes darting around the room. "Victoria's not stopping at a beach club. She's negotiating with developers to turn Osprey Lake into a luxury resort hotel spa, the works. Our dues are funding the groundwork." The room erupted into pandemonium. Investors hissed curses under their breath. Residents shouted accusations. And through it all, Victoria stood frozen, her empire crumbling like a sandcastle in a tide surge. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Because for the first time in this war, the tide wasn't just turning, it was a tsunami. Outside, under a bruised purple sky, Aria let out a low whistle. "That was a massacre." "Phase 1, Walter said grimly, lighting a cigarette with hands that didn't shake. "Don't kid yourselves." "She's not done. You back a predator into a corner, it comes out swinging." He was right. As we walked to the truck, my phone buzzed with a notification that turned my stomach to ice. Maxwell had just posted a new video. A tear-streaked Victoria stared into the camera, her voice cracking with rehearsed anguish. "They're trying to steal our home," she whispered. "Eco-terrorists and liars fabricating endangered species, claims to destroy everything we've built." The caption read, "Stand with Victoria, fight back." And in that moment, I knew this wasn't over. It was about to get uglier than any of us imagined. The morning after the HOA bloodbath, a hush settled over Evergreen Bluff, thin, brittle, and dangerous. On the surface, the community looked unchanged: sprinklers, misting emerald lawns, sunlight glittering off chrome grills of parked SUVs. But beneath it all pulsed a tension you could taste, sharp as ozone before a storm. I woke to silence where there should have been hums, no fridge buzz, no router lights, no power. A bright orange tag fluttered from my front door, like a sick joke: electrical service disconnected due to safety violations. "This isn't incompetence," Aria said, scanning the notice. "It's calculated." She wasn't wrong. Before noon, my cell signal flatlined. When I hiked up to the main road for a better connection, I found the access gate fortified with construction equipment and a uniformed guard who refused me entry. They told us this property's condemned, he said, tone apologetic but unmoving. Scheduled for demolition next month. By the time I made it back on foot, sweat stinging my eyes, fury had congealed into something colder, resolve edged with steel. Victoria was done playing queen. She'd gone full tyrant. That night, Arya and I huddled in the cabin's dim lantern glow, drafting injunction requests by hand like rebels in a legal war zone. Walter called with news, some good, some bad. The county's freezing all permits until ownership disputes are resolved, he said. But Victoria's filing counterclaims. She's alleging environmental fraud, says you planted those firewing nests yourself. I laughed, a harsh sound, scraping my throat. What's next claim? I photoshopped the birds into existence. Don't underestimate her, Walter warned. Cornered animals bite hardest. He wasn't exaggerating. Hours later, Arya's phone buzzed with an alert, a live stream from Maxwell's channel. Victoria appeared on-screen, mascara streaking like war paint, voice trembling with righteous fury. They've poisoned our community, she cried, eyes glistening under ring lights. Eco-extremists, fabricating endangered species to steal our homes. My family is under attack. If you care about truth, stand with us. Hashtags exploded across the screen. Shisho Save Evergreen, Shisha Stop the Fraud. Donations poured into a GoFundMe titled Defend Our Dream. She's building an army, Arya muttered, scrolling through venom-laced comments. Burn the shack. Make him pay. My gut clenched. This wasn't just about property anymore. It was about perception, and Victoria was weaponizing it like napalm. 2 days later, the fight turned from digital to physical. I woke to the smell before I saw it, a sharp chemical tang riding the dawn breeze. Racing to the shoreline, I skidded to a stop. The water shimmered wrong. An oily sheen filmed the lake's surface, rainbowed like gasoline. Dead perch floated belly up, eyes glassed white. My chest hollowed as I scanned the reed beds and found them empty. The firewing nests, gone. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to silence, broken only by the soft slap of poisoned water against rotting reeds. Then rage roared in white-hot, scalding my veins. They did this, Arya said behind me, voice raw with disbelief. They didn't just sabotage you, they nuked the ecosystem. By noon, hazmat crews ringed the shoreline, their suits ghostly against the pine backdrop. Walter arrived grim-faced, jaw clenched hard enough to crack molars. Industrial solvents, he muttered, watching officials lower test vials into the slick. Not an accident. This was scorched earth. The local news swarmed in cameras snapping like gunfire. A reporter cornered me at the water's edge. Mr. Dawson, she said, microphone thrust like a blade. Are you alleging HOA involvement in this contamination? I looked past her to the lake, my lake bleeding rainbow poison under a sky too blue to care. Then I met the lens dead on. I'm not alleging, I said, voice low, steady. I'm stating. They did this because they knew they were losing. The segment aired that night, triggering a media wildfire. But for me, the damage wasn't pixels on a screen. It was here, tangible, stinking of chemicals and betrayal. I spent hours setting up makeshift barriers, wrists raw from hauling sandbags, while Arya documented every slick, every dead fish, like evidence at a murder scene. Somewhere around midnight, soaked in sweat and futility, I sank onto the dock. My reflection stared back, eyes ringed, face carved by exhaustion and rage. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. I wasn't just defending a cabin anymore. I wasn't just honoring my grandfather's legacy. This was war for the soul of Osprey Lake. The next morning, under a sky bruised with stormlight, I walked into the emergency HOA meeting like a man on a mission. Residents packed the clubhouse, faces, pale voices hushed as whispers ricocheted, contamination lawsuits, criminal charges. Richard, the landscape architect, spoke first, his tone, clipped professional fury simmering beneath. If these tests confirm deliberate dumping, it's a felony, he said. And let me be clear, my firm will not touch a project tainted by environmental crime. When my turn came, I didn't waste breath on politeness. I laid out the evidence, photos, lab results, chain of custody. Then I dropped the bomb purchase receipts traced to Maxwell Harrington's credit card. The room detonated. Shouts, gasps. Someone cursed loud enough to rattle the chandeliers. Victoria surged to her feet, face a rictus mask of rage and denial. Lies, she shrieked. Fabrications. This man is destroying our community. No, I said quietly, every syllable honed like steel. You did that the moment you decided profit mattered more than life. For a heartbeat silence. Then Dorothy rose again, ledger in hand, voice clear as a church bell. The board moves to remove Victoria Pierce effective immediately. Applause erupted, ragged, uncertain at first, then swelling like a storm surge. And as I stood there, chest heaving, something crystallized in my gut, resolve sharp and luminous. I wasn't just fighting for this lake anymore. I was leading the charge to save it. The sheriff's cruiser lights painted the pines in red and blue staccato as dusk folded over Evergreen Bluff. News crews swarmed the gates like vultures sensing fresh carrion, their lenses hungry for Victoria Pierce's downfall. But she wasn't there, not in her glass mansion, not in the clubhouse she once ruled like a throne room. She was running. Maxwell's last live stream had dropped hours earlier, shaky footage from inside a speeding SUV, his voice thick with manufactured outrage. They're framing us, he cried, camera swinging to Victoria, who dabbed at crocodile tears with a silk monogrammed handkerchief. We built this dream and they're trying to destroy it. The comments were brutal, half cheering, half jeering, but none of it mattered now, because while they spewed their final act to the digital void, a BOLO alert blazed across state lines. When the call came an hour later, Walter's expression was carved from grim satisfaction. They caught them at the Canadian border, he said, voice flat as a judge's gavel. Suitcases full of cash, forged permits, laptop full of plans for Project Phoenix removal. The irony hit like a sucker punch. They'd named their crime after the very creature they tried to erase. Charges piled like driftwood in a flood, environmental, sabotage, forgery, wire fraud. The GoFundMe money frozen. Investor ties vaporized. Victoria's empire of curated perfection crumbled overnight, leaving nothing but ash and hashtags turned against her, General and Evergreen exposed. But victory tasted bitter when I stood on the poisoned shore, hazmat tape fluttering like crime scene ribbons. The lake was scarred, its mirror surface dulled under chemical sheen, and the fire wings, those living embers that had set this war ablaze, were gone. For weeks I poured myself into restoration like a penance. We hauled contaminated soil-deployed aerators, introduced biofilters. Richard Clark returned with his crew, not as hired guns, but as volunteers donating expertise to undo the damage his firm had unknowingly abetted. Residents once hostile now stood shoulder to shoulder, with us trading pitchforks of outrage for shovels of redemption. Aria was everywhere filing injunctions, rallying volunteers, briefing reporters until her voice rasped raw. And Walter, grizzled and tireless, worked the legal battlefield like a general with nothing left to prove but honor. Slowly and possibly, the lake began to breathe again. Water cleared from sickly gray to glints of green and blue. Willow shoots unfurled tender leaves along the rehabilitated banks. And one dawn, weeks after headlines moved on and hashtags lost their teeth, I heard it. A cry like a flare splitting the stillness. I ran to the dock, heart-battering ribs. There, slicing through the sky on copper wings, came a miracle in motion. A fire wing backlit by the newborn sun, wheeling low before vanishing into the pines. Then another, and another. By noon, Aria found me sitting cross-legged on the dock, tears tracking through lake dust, camera slack in my lap. "They're back," I whispered, as if saying it too loud might shatter the spell. She smiled, a soft, fierce curve that held all the battles we'd fought and all the wars we'd won. "Told you they would be." The transformation of Evergreen Bluff wasn't instant, but it was irreversible. Victoria's mansion foreclosure looming was repurposed as an environmental education center. HOA leadership changed hands with Richard at the helm and Dorothy as watchdog-in-chief. Dues that once funded manicured tyranny now flowed into conservation initiatives. And me, I stood on the same porch where this all began, watching neighbors, actual neighbors, now not adversaries, hauling mulch for the new shoreline buffer. Kids darted between wildflower beds chasing butterflies instead of HOA inspectors. Sometimes I'd catch sight of my grandfather's photo on the mantel, his eyes twinkling, with that secret keeper's smile, and wonder if he'd planned it all. The vault, the deeds, the trust he'd buried like a seed, waiting for fire to crack it open. He left me land. But more than that, he left me a mission. And somewhere over the lake, as fire wings stitched arcs of copper light into the sky, I finally understood legacies aren't about what we inherit. They're about what we fight to protect. What started as a fight to save a cabin became a lesson in something bigger. Resilience isn't born from isolation, it's forged in connection. My grandfather's legacy wasn't just land deeds or conservation plans. It was the belief that protecting what matters most often means standing in the fire when it would be easier to walk away. For weeks, I thought victory meant crushing an HOA, but real victory came when a fractured community found common ground, not through force, but through purpose. It came when neighbors traded lawsuits for shovels, when greed gave way to stewardship, when a poisoned lake bloomed back to life because people chose to care. Legacies aren't preserved in silence. They're defended by voices willing to speak, hands willing to work, and hearts stubborn enough to hope even when the sky feels like it's falling. You don't need to own a lake to make a difference. Start small, plant native species, volunteer for a cleanup, challenge policies that prioritize profit over preservation. If you see something wrong, speak up, document, organize. Because environmental protection isn't just a government job, it's a community responsibility. And if you inherit something, land, a house, a tradition, ask yourself, what story will it tell when you're gone? One of neglect or one of courage, where you fought for something that outlasted you? If this story inspired you, hit like, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe for more real stories about resilience, legacy, and the fight for what truly matters.